My name is Kevin O'Neill. I am one of the assistants to the city manager here at the city. We're joined by several individuals from our consultants, which is Burke Consulting, as well as additional a little later in the presentation in this workshop. Jonathan, do you want to go ahead and share the PowerPoint? So I did want to, before we get started, recognize and acknowledge and thank Councilmember Arndt for attending tonight, and for the rest of you for being here. We're hoping to get a lot of great information and kind of keep this casual and conversational. So the objectives for tonight is for us, the city and the consultants, to share some key context, some information about the resources, about the community, just so you have a really good picture of what's going on here currently, some of the data that we look at, and maybe there's some things that you're not familiar with that will be news to you. And then more importantly, we want to hear from you. That's the whole reason we're having this workshop, is to talk to you, to hear from you, to find out what's important, maybe what's not important, especially as it relates to the coming 5 to 10 years. So we'll go through introductions of what we're talking about here, the process, the project, a brief presentation on some of the key context items that City Manager Brandon Buchanan will be going through. And then this is the part where we might kind of be a little flexible. We were planning on doing breakout rooms, but based on the number of attendees, which may continue to climb, someone else just joined us. Thank you for joining us. We may not do breakout rooms, or we may continue to do breakout rooms. We'll kind of decide that on the fly. And then after the breakouts, we'll do a very brief report out, close out the meeting, and we'll all go about our ways. So the next slide, we wanted to just really talk about real quick why we're here. There's 2 plans that are in the works, and they're different, but there's a lot of similarities between the 2. And there's 2 different people leading both of the efforts, with Burke Consulting being the consultant for both. So I am managing the strategic plan portion. Alex Herzog, the other assistant to the city manager, is doing the economic development portion. So real quick, I just want to run through what the strategic plan is. Alex will jump on. He'll run through real quick what the economic development plan is, and then we'll jump into the context and get into the breakout rooms. So with the strategic plan, the city is seeking to establish what the future will look like for the city of Woodinville and how different items should be prioritized. To do this, the city has committed to completing a comprehensive strategic planning effort that incorporates the feedback from elected officials, our city council, from city staff, and most importantly, the community itself. So those of you that are in attendance. We started the community engagement piece of this project earlier this month through the usage of an online survey tool. Hopefully you've also taken that survey. If you haven't, you can find it on our website. I can drop the link in as soon as I finish here, or you can also find it on our social media sites. The survey is different from what we've done in the past, and is different from another survey that's going to be coming out very soon. Whereas previous surveys have been more of gathering a snapshot of right now, kind of getting a report card of how the city's doing. This survey is looking forward. It's helping us gather information to hear where the community wants the city to go, rather than how we're doing right now. And the data that we receive from that survey, as well as the exercise tonight, will help us shape what that future is. What we are really aiming to do is to determine what the city's future will look like, to develop a mission and governing guidelines for the city that will help us create durable goals and strategies, and to create action items that can be completed, benchmarked, so that we can map out exactly how we achieve those goals. So we don't want to just set a lofty vision for the future. We want to figure out, how do we get there? After hearing from you, the community, the strategic planning process will transition into conversations with the city council, where staff and council will take the information we gather from tonight and from that online survey to create and formalize a traditional strategic plan that will become one of many, or one of the few, I should say, guiding documents for the city that we can reference and help guide public policy. So that's pretty much the strategic plan in a nutshell. Like I said, Alex Herzog, who is online tonight, is managing the economic development plan. So I'd like to hand it over to him to give a brief synopsis of that plan. Alex?
Yes, we'll do it. Thank you, Kevin. So I'm Alex. I'm assistant to the city manager, and economic development is under my umbrella, along with a bunch of other things. As far as economic development, I guess by way of context, the last time the city created an economic development plan was way back in 2008. So not only has that been over a decade now, but also I think many people on the call might agree that the city has changed pretty significantly in the last 13 years. So we thought it worthwhile to go through the exercise again and hopefully give us a basis from which to plan and operate during the coming years. So about the plan itself, the way we're thinking about it now, the plan will have 3 significant prongs. The first one, data collection. We need a lot of data to understand our current environment. That's everything from demographics to understanding different sectors, businesses within the city, and then how do we compare to the region among those metrics. And not only that, we want data that we can use. And by that, I mean, we want data that we can build upon as the years roll on, and from which we can draw trends and find gaps and fill those if we can. The second prong is engagement and outreach. That's everyone on this call. I think we all might also agree that the city cannot and should not create a plan of this significance in a bubble by itself. We definitely need our business community, our residents, everyone to be involved and help us form what is prong 3, which is goals, strategies, and policies. And specifically what I mean by that is some of you may be familiar with plans of this sort that are highly aspirational or broad and cover a wide range of topics, and that's about it. Well, we don't want that kind of plan. We want something that we can actually do something with. And specifically, we've broken that even into 2 pieces. We want short-term goals, policies, and actions that may cover the next 1 to 5 years to aid businesses in recovering from the impacts of COVID, and then also longer-term goals, policies, and actions that will cover us for the next 5 to 10 years that can support existing businesses, attract more businesses that are a good fit for Woodinville. And so that's pretty much the basis of what you'll hear tonight. You'll hear some of the data, and again, we're really looking forward to hearing your thoughts on all this as well.
Great, thank you, Alex. So next, we just want to touch on real quickly the schedule we're looking at. So although these 2 projects are happening at the same time, the timeline is slightly different, mostly in that the economic development plan we're planning to wrap that up a few months after the strategic plan. As you can see here, the rows are broken out into 4 different categories: strategic plan timeline, economic development plan timeline, our engagement timeline, with the box in blue being where we're at tonight, and then our different touch points with city council. So strategic plan, we're hoping to wrap up April, maybe into May. Economic development plan, June, July, and we have still a couple more opportunities for the public to weigh in, and then we start really building off of the information we gather with the city council, who will ultimately be adopting these plans. So next slide. And next, I'm going to hand it off to Brandon Buchanan, our city's city manager, who will go over some key context and some different data as it relates to the city and how we operate. So Brandon, take it away.
Yes, thank you, Kevin. As mentioned, I'm Brandon Buchanan. I'm the city manager here in Woodinville. In order to talk about kind of where we're going, I think it's helpful to have some context of how we got to where we're at and some just basics around the community. So that's kind of a shared understanding with everybody. Woodinville is what we call a contract city, as opposed to most cities, which are operated as full service cities, which means we don't provide the full slug of services ourselves that most cities provide. We do provide a good number of those services that you traditionally see from a city in-house through whether that's the streets and stormwater, parks, engineering, development services. We limit our lines of business, and then we partner with entities that are not more capable, but are experts in their lines of business. So for example, we don't have our own fire department. We work with Woodinville Fire and Rescue District. We don't have our own water utility like many cities traditionally do. We said we partner and work with the Woodinville Water and Sewer District. Same thing for solid waste. That's provided through Waste Management, a private entity. And then schools, of course, while some jurisdictions, other cities provide school districts themselves, we partner with the North Shore School District, of course. And then even on some, the police, you see them with Woodinville badges on, but they're all King County deputies providing services through a contract to the community. Kind of just how we deliver those services from a budgetary perspective, we kind of break roughly into thirds. So about a third of that is of our spending is on general government. So that's things like city management, IT, human resources, facilities, et cetera. About a third of that is public safety, which includes the largest part of that is our contract with King County Sheriff's Office for police services. And that also provides municipal court and related custody services. And then about a third of that is other services. So this is things like building permitting and engineering, public works projects that you see around the community, items like park maintenance, for example. Woodinville is somewhat unique in the money that it collects to fund those services and efforts. Woodinville derives significantly more per capita revenue from sales tax than its neighbors. Many communities, including in the local area, fund most of their services from property taxes. That's not the case in Woodinville. The majority of our revenue comes from sales tax, and a large amount of that bucket of money comes from general retail sales. So retail sales when you go shopping in the area. And that's largely because Woodinville is a regional retail center. For a small community, we have quite a bit of businesses, a disproportionate amount of businesses for a small community as we are. Woodinville manages its public resources very carefully and seeks to keep taxes and fees low. For example, we rarely raise property taxes, for example. We've done, I believe, 2 in the last 10 plus years, which is very atypical for communities to do that on a more regular basis. That, of course, comes with some trade-offs that factors such as inflation, like we're seeing now, growth and demand for more city services cost more money. And without raising rates or otherwise generating revenue, at some point there's an imbalance there. So that's something that we're going to have to be cognizant of in the future. All right, we mentioned expanding city services, and I won't go into all the specifics on this, but some general, I think, visuals on this. I think kind of look at the kind of plum colored bars there, and then the trend line up at the top. We see that over time, our city FTEs, for some different reasons that I can explain, kind of shrunk in 2008, and that was right around the Great Recession, obviously, that we all remember. At that time, the city made a conscientious decision to get out of the parks and recreation business as a budget saving measure. That's when many communities across the country were dealing with the fallout of the Great Recession and trying to figure out how to balance their budgets. And that number continued to fall over time until we got to about 2016, when we finally were in a position where we could start adding some more services back. We haven't got back to the Parks and Recreation conversation yet, but as we've seen demand for different services in the community grow over time, that number started to creep up slowly. It has not kept pace necessarily with the population growth, which we'll look here on the next chart. Population has grown over time, but and you can see down kind of in the rows at the bottom there, the FTE count hasn't grown necessarily commensurate with that over time. FTE being full-time employees, excuse me. Yeah, that's fine. We talk about growth in the community. We kind of look at some different scenarios here, and being part of the metro area, we're part of a larger planning conversation, and actually on the state level. We have, and I'll spare some of the details on it, but we work jointly with the partners in the region and across the state to accommodate the growth that we know is constant in our area. Through some of those efforts and those joint planning efforts, we set growth targets for our community over the next 20, 30-year period of time. Right now, our growth target that we've identified is about 17,000 residents by 2040. That's according to that regional plan. However, and that's that kind of dashed line you see there, kind of slow, steady growth over the next 20 years. However, that's a great plan, but reality is shaping up already to be somewhat different than that. And that's where this yellow line comes in. We've seen and are actively working through a significant number of development projects, largely in our downtown area. And that means certain things for our community, where we expect that number to increase actually quite significantly even before that 20-year planning horizon, where we could reach somewhere just north of 18,000 by 2031 and then kind of plateau from there. That's a significant population increase in a very short period of time. You can see there about 40% possible in the next 10 years. And most of that, as I mentioned, is targeted to be downtown in an area that historically hasn't had a lot of residential development and not a lot of density. And so that has implications for a lot of what we do. How do we deal with traffic? How do we deal with utilities? Maintaining that quality of life that we all value so much, and that's why we live here. Let me see here. And I think with that, I'll introduce it or turn it back over to Chloe, who's with Burke, our consulting firm, and she's going to run through some of the demographics as we're seeing today and where we see them heading in the near future in town.
Thanks, Brandon. As Brandon mentioned, I'm Chloe Kinsey. I'm part of the Burke consulting team working with the City of Woodinville on the strategic plan and economic development plan. So continuing with the key context, we have some data points here on housing. The chart that you see on the right here shows the number of new housing units that have been permitted in Woodinville in recent years by housing unit type. And as you can see, over the last 3 years, or between 2018 and 2020, there were a significant number of new multifamily units permitted. Those are permitted, not necessarily built at this point. And as Brandon mentioned, the majority of those are in the downtown area. Another interesting point is that about 62% of households in Woodinville actually are 1 or 2 person households, which is a potential indicator that there may be demand for smaller housing units. Affordability is a major, as in many communities right now, is a major concern. Housing prices in Woodinville have been increasing quite quickly in recent years. The value of the typical home has risen about 40% over the last 2 years. And while Woodinville has a relatively high median household income, housing prices are high enough that many households are housing cost burdened. And that term, housing cost burdened, is a term that the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development uses to describe households that spend more than 30% of their income on housing, with severely cost burden, meaning a household spends more than 50% of its income on housing. And what we see in Woodinville is that about a quarter of households that own their home meet that definition of being cost burdened or severely cost burdened, and the same is true for about half of renter households. So moving forward, taking a look at some demographics. In terms of race and ethnicity, Woodinville is becoming more diverse. The Asian, Hispanic, Latino, and multiracial populations have grown as a percentage of total residents since 2010. Additionally, like many communities, Woodinville's population is likely to skew older 20 years from now than it does currently, particularly as the baby boomer generation ages. Moving forward again, we've got some information on education and income. Woodinville's population has a very high level of educational attainment. About 57% of adults have a bachelor's degree or higher. Additionally, the median household income is relatively high at about $106,000 in 2019. However, at that time, about 17% of households in Woodinville were below 50% of the area median income for King County, which is the threshold that the Federal Department of Housing and Urban Development uses to classify households as very low income for an area. Moving forward, got some information here about employment and journeys to work. Among those who live in Woodinville, the most common areas of employment, most common sectors of employment are management, business, and financial occupations, and computer engineering and science occupations. But when we look at jobs that are located in Woodinville, the most common sectors are services, manufacturing, and construction. So we've got two different job bases there. If you look at the chart to the right, what you'll see is that among those who work in Woodinville, the majority, 98%, live outside the city. And it really looks like the reverse for those who live in Woodinville, about 94% work outside the city. We also have some data on commutes. So the caveat here is that this is pre-pandemic data. So prior to the pandemic, about 50% of those who lived in Woodinville and worked had commutes that were 30 minutes or longer, and about 80% of those commutes were by single occupancy vehicle. But we know with the pandemic that likely looks quite different, particularly with the rise of remote work. So finally, we're taking a quick look at taxable retail sales, which is a metric that can give us a picture of the strongest economic sectors in the city, which for Woodinville are restaurants and bars, general merchandise, and garden supplies. Additionally, it's important to note that the tourism industry generally represents about 10 to 15% of total taxable retail sales in Woodinville. It can vary a little bit from year to year, but it's generally in that range. And then as mentioned previously, Woodinville has significantly higher taxable retail sales per capita than many other cities in King County. Reflecting the fact that Woodinville is a regional retail center and also does have things like tourism bringing in folks who spend money in the city. All right, and now I will hand it over to my colleague Lisa for some Q&A portion.
Yeah, hi everybody. Like Chloe said, my name is Lisa Johnson. I'm also with the Burke team. And we thought we'd just pause here. So that's the end of our official presentation portion. And wanted to take a couple minutes in case there's some clarifying questions that you might have about the information we just went through. We'll get to some of the bigger topical conversations in the group discussion, but if you if you have any kind of more clarifying level questions, please put those in the chat and we'll have our staff respond to those. I see a question here from Karen. What category do the wineries fall into on the last slide? And I think that would be referencing the taxable retail sales slide.
So in terms of, that broader categorization of tourism industry, wineries would fall under that if it was like the restaurant, bar, like in-person portion of it. There are some cases where wineries can fall under a certain type of manufacturing. So it really depends whether it's sort of like the retail function or like the manufacturing wholesale side.
Hopefully that answers your question, but feel free to follow up if you'd like any more detail. Does anyone else have any other clarifying questions before we kind of switch modes to more of a discussion? Here's one. Nancy's asking if Chateau Ste. Michelle is in the tax base for Woodinville. I would assume that would be yes, but please correct me if I'm wrong on that. I see nods from our city staffers, so I think that is correct.
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, well, maybe just to switch things up a bit, I think we have small enough of a group that will just stay in one room together for the conversation.